Hey everyone, so today we're going to dive into the 7 most recent updates to the US Constitution. You know, if you think about the Constitution as kind of like the operating system for the entire country, then these amendments, they're like the critical patch notes, each one fixing a bug or adding some vital new feature.
All right, so let me ask you this. What do prohibition, presidential power, and a 200-year-old student paper all have in common? I know it sounds like the setup to a weird joke, but the answer actually tells us something really fundamental about how this country works.
The answer is they all changed the U.S. Constitution, right here in the modern era. And that's really the big idea we're digging into today. The Constitution, it's not some dusty old document locked away in a museum. No, it's a living, breathing framework that has to adapt to new challenges.
Okay, so first up, power and the president. We're going to look at how two really big crises. One about a president serving way longer than anyone expected, and another, a just awful national tragedy, basically forced the country to define some clear guardrails for the most powerful office in the world.
You know, for the first century and a half of the country's history, there wasn't actually a law stopping a president from running for a third term or a fourth or even a fifth. The whole two-term limit thing, it was just a tradition that George Washington started, and everyone just kind of went along with it. Well, until someone didn't.
So when Franklin D. Roosevelt got elected to an absolutely unprecedented 4 terms, that tradition was just shattered. And that's what led to the 22nd Amendment, which was ratified back in 1951. The text itself is super direct. It says, and I'm quoting here, "No person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice."
And just like that, what was once an informal tradition became the official law of the land. So the 2-term limit, it was now a hard and fast constitutional rule, not just a polite suggestion anymore.
Then, just a little over a decade later, another huge crisis hits. The assassination of President Kennedy in 1963, it exposed some really serious gaps in the rules of succession. I mean, think about it. What happens if a president is disabled but not dead? Or what if the vice presidency is suddenly empty? The Constitution was dangerously silent on these things.
All that uncertainty is what led directly to the 25th Amendment in 1967. It was designed to answer those critical questions. So step 1, the vice president becomes president. No gray area, no ambiguity. Step 2, it creates a way to actually fill a vacant VP spot. And third, and this one is super important, it lays out a clear procedure for when a president just can't perform their duties. It's really the ultimate constitutional backup plan.
All right, let's shift gears to our next big theme, making the vote count.
This next batch of amendments is all about expanding the promise of democracy and making sure more Americans could actually participate.
So first up, we've got the 23rd Amendment from 1961, which dealt with a pretty glaring blind spot. I mean, for nearly 200 years, the American citizens living in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, had zero say in who became president. This amendment finally gave D.C. electoral votes and gave those residents a voice.
Then, just 3 years later, the 24th Amendment came along and knocked down another huge barrier, the poll tax. This was literally a fee you had to pay just to vote, and it was specifically designed to stop poor citizens, especially African Americans, from casting a ballot. This amendment made that illegal in federal elections, basically saying your right to vote shouldn't come with a price tag.
And then you fast forward to 1971, right in the middle of the Vietnam War. This really powerful slogan starts to take hold. Old enough to fight, old enough to vote. It made so much sense that the 26th Amendment passed with incredible speed, lowering the national voting age from 21 down to 18. The logic was simple, right? If you're old enough to be drafted and sent to war, you should absolutely be old enough to have a say in the government that's sending you.
Okay, our last section is all about what I like to call constitutional course corrects. Because look, sometimes amendments are needed to fix, well, a massive mistake. And in one absolutely remarkable case, to bring back an idea that had been lost to history for 200 years.
So let's start with the big one, the big fix. In 1933, we get the 21st Amendment. And the word in, it's about as blunt as you can get. It just says, "The 18th article of amendment to the Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed." That's it.
And boom. In simple terms, the nationwide ban on alcohol was over. The whole 13-year national experiment with prohibition? Done. It's actually the only time in U.S. history that a new amendment was passed just to cancel out an old one. It was basically a giant constitutional undo button.
Now, get ready for one of the wildest stories in all of constitutional law. Believe it or not, an amendment was proposed way back in 1789 as part of the original Bill of Rights, but it just didn't get ratified by enough states, so it was forgotten. For centuries. Then, in the 1980s, a student stumbles upon it while researching a paper, starts a grassroots campaign, and in 1992, it actually gets ratified and added to the Constitution.
Think about that. It took 202 years, 7 months, and 12 days for this thing to become law. That is, without a doubt, the undisputed record for the longest ratification in American history. Just wow.
So what did this long-lost 27th Amendment even do? Well, it's actually a pretty simple rule about accountability. It says that if members of Congress vote to give themselves a pay raise, that raise can't take effect until after the next election of representatives. It basically forces them to face the voters before they can cash that bigger check.
And that brings us to the end of our list, but it also opens up a much, much bigger question, and that's about the future of the Constitution itself.
You see, the Constitution really isn't just a historical document set in stone. It's a living set of rules. And from setting term limits and expanding voting rights to, fixing some pretty big past mistakes, these 7 modern amendments prove that every generation can shape it. We, the people, really do have the power and the process to keep shaping our own rules.
So I'll just leave you with this final thought. Every single one of these amendments was a direct response to a major problem of its time. And that kind of makes you wonder, right? What issue facing us today might one day be solved by the 28th Amendment? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.